what tends to happen is because it's all done through Amazon, through internet, I write quite a lot for different magazines on and off. So they tend to do a review, which is what happened for the book in America.
Right.
And I've written a couple of articles, I think, for both the magazines that have been printed in America. And we do occasionally, we've done a podcast, I do a few talks, I do quite a few talks locally, and I run microscope groups locally. But what normally happens is we have a few big shows around. So you tend to go to shows and they do I've got a specialist book publisher over here called Northern Bee Books, and he's got the biggest collection of English language bee books in the world.
Wow.
And, they promote your book there, because if I was to do it myself, you can't get the publicity basically. It's so hard to do, and the costings. So at least nowadays, modern technology, you publish on demand. So you only probably print 30 books off at a time, sort of thing. And then that way you're not having to the economies of scale. It might be doing 1,000 run, but I'm not a well-known author, so they aren't going to sell like that. It's a different way of doing it. I've been very lucky because the first book I had, a Polish professor gave me all his permission to use the anatomy bits and pieces, and very kindly edited it for me. My third book, I've got another bee professor in Brazil who's doing the editing for me and checking the facts for me. Tom Seeley's been very kind, giving me lots of information and permission to quote from some of his articles and other bits. And there's a few other beekeeping professors in England that have pointed me in the direction of who to contact, and if not, that sort of thing, shared some knowledge with me, which I can't get because I don't belong to any societies, scientific societies. Because a lot of them publish, and you've got to spend $40 a time just to get a reprint sort of thing or something. So and you can't always quote from it, so it makes it harder. But yeah, it's been interesting.
It's got to be a
beekeeping. Because I'm retired. And sadly, my wife's had cancer 3 times. I retired a year early to look after her, and it's a hobby you can do from home. It's as and when and whatever sort of thing, so you can get into it, and my wife says, I brew beer as a hobby for 40 odd years. I'm an avid book reader and I do bees. So and the fourth thing she says, it's bees, books, beer, and very boring. I've always got something to get on with. But it's interesting, that it's just keeping the grey cells going.
So you're a mechanical quality engineer. What did you do?
Well, I started my life off as a police cadet, and then I went into engineering and sheet metal work, painting, and I worked in management and development side. And when my company packed up, I moved down to Devon, and I got a job as a quality inspector for aircraft parts. So I then specialised in that, in mechanical and rubber, glues and that sort of thing, because everything from on an aircraft, that from the time the materials come out of the ground to the time it goes on to the plane, there has to be traceability and inspection and criteria and made to certain specifications and that sort of thing. So that was my role, was to do all of that and check it all out and things. So that's what I did for the last, 15 years, I think.
Oh boy! So from that to beekeeping,
I've always been in engineering.
Yeah.
I always say to people that when, if you were to cut me open, we have a thing called rock in England, which is basically a candy bar, which is sugar, and it's a long roll, and in the middle of it, they often put the name of the place where you buy it from. And so you can read it when you cut it in half. And I always say to people, when they cut me in half, they'll have, engineer written through it, I think.
Those are some good qualities.
Yes. I've always done my own plumbing, electricity and that sort of thing, because that's what I'm a mechanical engineer. It's what I do. I don't think about it. I just do it. But I don't do it anymore, not really, because I don't, I'm getting older now and I don't need to do it and I don't want to do it. So I pay somebody else nowadays.
Good problem.
My wife, they haven't made a good enough job, but I would have done it. So, yes, never mind. How many people have we got, today?
So they signed up, I guess it was 110 Right at
Okay.
the moment, they got 39 signed on. So what time? It's still got a minute or so.
Okay, no rush. I'm not in a rush.
Good, good.
How many bees hives have you got?
How many members do we have in our club? Oh, hives? I myself have about 8.
Yeah.
So it's always evolving.
Yes. Yes, I made a hive this year and put a swarm in it, and I've copied the details basically from Tom Seeley's book, so that it mimics a tree.
Huh.
It's got much insulation all the way around, and I've got a smaller entrance hole. I think it's about 1.5 inches, and it's about 2 inches long. So that the bees can get in there. And I've just put the swarm in there, and I slightly cheated because I made the inside so it would fit a frame, so I can always use it if I want to. And I just put 3 frames in there. It will hold, I think, about 10 or 11. But I just put 3 frames in there to get the bees going. And on the other couple of frames I put in, I just put some strips of wax across the top, just 1 inch, just to give them a start to build on. And they've seemed to have been okay, and they seem to have built up enough over the autumn time to survive. So, and I've got 2 polystyrene hives and a wooden hive. The polystyrene hives, I always had the wooden hive, but the polystyrene hive I brought because a friend of mine traded his in. He had only got 10 new polystyrene ones, or second-hand ones, and he reckoned his bees overwintered. Well, I overwintered a nuke in a small polystyrene hive of 5 frames, and they came out really well. So I was quite impressed. So I decided to swap it over. I think I've got probably, depending on each colony, because it depends on the strength of the colony, I've probably got a reasonable amount of honey off of the polystyrenes, better than I have on the wooden hives. For some bits, but again, I think it's very, very dependent on the bees, the swarm, and on the day and the weather. So
that's interesting. So that's the way to go. You think the better is better insulated, and the weather. You feel the weather is very similar to what we have, I suppose.
We don't get. I mean, our summers here can get up to say 28, 30 degrees, which is 80 Fahrenheit. And we can get down to about 32. Just about 32, 28 down here. So we don't get too extremes of weather, where I live now anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Uh-oh. Couple people didn't get the link, so I'm going to forward that to them here.
If you're talking about Rick, I already took care of that.
Okay. Barb just emailed. I'll send it to her too.
Yeah, it seems, I don't understand why.
Okay, good.
So they ask for the Zoom via chat, but they don't give me their email address. I have to go find it.
Oh boy.
Makes it a little more difficult.
Is that a relative of yours at the bottom, Noel?
Yes, that's my son.
I take it you're a beekeeper as well, is he?
Are you?
Yeah. Just I moved cities, but hopefully I'll start one this spring. So
Is your dad a good teacher?
There you go.
best.
The best. That's good.
You better say that or I'll cut him off the show.
Cut his allowance off.
Well, how's it looking, Robert? A lot of people still in the waiting room, or how does that work?
Okay, so I got a couple of people that text me their phone number, so I gotta now translate it to an email and send it to them.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm not in a rush, so we can give people another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, let's give them a couple more minutes. I'm sending the last email here.
Thanks for sending the link, everyone. I don't know where my link went to, but I never saw it. So thank you for sending it.
Yeah, no problem. We gotta figure out why it's happening. You're saying it's not going to your junk mail?
I saw your reminders, and I received the Eventbrite ticket. I just never received anything that actually had the link that you just sent me in Messenger.
Yeah, so the second email, I sent 2 emails. One is to introduce the class, and the second one at the bottom, it says join the meeting, and the link is hidden behind it.
Yeah, I never got the second email for some reason.
No,
So,
okay.
but thank you for sending the link. I do appreciate it, and sorry to be a burden.
Yeah, no problem. You're welcome. So I think I just sent the last one, Andy. Randy, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'll keep monitoring. Roseanne is not with us today. Usually she helps. So maybe you and I can monitor the emails and links and texts, and
Yep, for sure.
hopefully we can get everybody in.
Was that on Facebook you're seeing activity?
Some are texting me, some are sending me instant messages. It's coming from all directions. It never fails. So we have 49 people. And this is a bit early, Graham. Usually we have our meetings around 7 o'clock. And
Yeah.
we appreciate you making the time because it's 11 o'clock your time right now in England. So thank you for being here. Randy, what do you think? We should start?
Yeah, let's get it going, and we can watch as we go and add them as we go on.
Randy, why don't we jump right into it? I got some emails and stuff to respond to here. So if you want to go ahead and introduce
Yep.
Graham, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so everybody just heard Robert. Graham is signed on today from Devon, England, and the time difference is 5 hours. So I said, what if we meet at 7 like we normally do? And he says, oh my, that'd be 1 in the morning. So wanted to be at 5 o'clock, but I was concerned we'd have too many people still at work. So we negotiated 6, so it's 11 p.m. past his bedtime, but he's on board. And wait till you see his presentation. I was privileged to look at some of his slides. It's going to be an amazing talk. So he retired as a mechanical quality engineer, inspecting airplane parts and pieces. And from that, he became a beekeeper. He was involved with the British Beekeepers Association, where he got microscopy. Is that how you call it?
Yeah.
A microscopy certificate, and you'll see the pictures that he's been able to take, I guess, through the microscope, close-ups of parts of the bee that are just spectacular. He has another book that's due out soon, Honeybees, Hive of the Engineer, and that's due out in a couple of months. It's delayed because of COVID, imagine. Everything's delayed because of COVID, but we're glad to have him here, and I'll let you go to town there, Graham. Okay.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope I can entertain you for the next hour or so. As Randy said, my name is Graham Kingham. I keep 4 hives in Devon, and I'm a bit of a Darwinian type beekeeper. I'm a devotee of probably of your the king beekeeper himself, Tom Seeley. That's not to say that I don't do things in the correct way or incorrect way, but I don't tend to treat my bees. I try and let them get on with it. I'm not a big lover of honey. My wife's diabetic, so she shouldn't be eating honey. I keep bees for interest, but more than anything else, I'm much more concerned about the pollination and the problems we're all going to get. So that's where I've come from. Let's get started on the drone. The drone gets a poor press. He just eats, sleeps, and if he's extremely lucky, he gets to lay down his life for his colony, i.e. he gets to mate with the queen. This is a PR talk on behalf of the 50% of the bee genetics that I think get neglected. A lot of research has been done into bees, a huge amount, but the drone seems to be the one that they're sort of lacking of. And if you think of any farming community, 50% of your stock is the male. We don't tend to look too much about that with the bees, and they've got a very unique mating system because they're social insects. So drones are more important than what you think, and I've titled them The True Specialist in the Field because it is out in the field really that they have to perform, where they have to go and where they have to basically spend most of their, if you like, working life. Here's a picture of a dead drone. That was picked up on the bottom of my hive on the landing board. Have a quick look at that picture. You've got massive long wings. You've got a curved belly there to help in mating. If you look at the top of the abdomen, it's lost a lot of hairs. And on the top of the thorax, you can't quite see on this picture, but you'll see it in a minute, it's quite bald. It's indicating that it's died a natural death through old age. This bee, it hasn't mated. It's got massive eyes and large antennae. And the word drone comes from the Old English drain, dran, from a Germanic verb, resounding boom. Now, if anybody has heard a swarm, you'll hear a high-pitched sort of noise, and especially when your bees are flying around. But when you go to a drone congregation area, because we're so poorly equipped with our own senses, which I'll explain about later, we don't see them. They're too small. They fly too quickly. But you can hear them. Our ears will pick them up. And it isn't a resounding boom, but it is a resounding sort of deep buzz. Very, very noticeable. Unfortunately, I can't share videos with you today because my linking here won't link in because my internet provider is too slow. But we've got some good pictures where we can show the drones flying around. But more,
I'll be able to share my screen, Graham, and we can show those videos.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, we'll have a look if we can do it later. So anyway, so all we get with this here, in the beginning, drones are laid from unfertilized eggs and workers come from fertilized eggs. The drone has no father because the eggs aren't fertilized, only a grandfather. They're laid in the hive when it's basically getting full, when the queen's in full production, ramping up, around about mid-springtime. There has to be plenty of pollen about. Normally, the drones are raised about 3 to 4 weeks before the queens start to swarm or supersedence goes about, so on that side of it. They can live for an extended time in a colony if it's queenless, because they obviously have a role to play. If they haven't got a queen, they still need some drones to fertilize the queens. Otherwise, at the end of the season, the drones will be killed off in the autumn. They literally will be pushed outside the hive, and you can often see loads of them outside. In times of starvation, in England, we call it the Dune Gap, when the flowers, sort of the first flush have come in spring, but the summer flowers haven't come out yet. And we call it starvation time. And quite often, if there's not enough pollen going in, and nectar, then you will see loads of bees outside on the floor trying to get back in with the drones because they've been kicked out. The development of the drone, it's the workers that make the drone cells, and it's the size of the cell that encourages the queen to deposit an unfertilized egg in there. Normally, it's around about the bottom of the comb in the wild, but because we used pressed comb, it presents a problem. Pressed comb has got a hexagonal shape pressed into it, but it's a smaller size. It's designed for worker bees, and therefore it's not a comb that's designed for drones. You can put comb in there for drones, and if you put a whole sheet in there, they don't always tend to want to lay drones in the whole of the sheet. They'll tend to go into the bottom. Wild colonies, Tom Seeley has reported, have got 15%, 17% drones. Most managed colonies tend to have about 5% drones. Now, over the, if you call it the mating season, the queen roughly lays about 4,000 to 5,000 drones, of which only about 10%, 400 or more, are actually fertile, which we'll explain to you later. There's a huge investment into raising drones because all they're going to do is pass on their genetics, basically. The cell size of a worker is about, I'm sorry about this, 5.4 millimeters. The drone size is 6.4, which I know is a quarter of an inch. And they won't tend to put workers into drone cells, but they can put drones into worker cells. And the net result of that is that the drone becomes smaller in size because of the restriction. And they are fertile, but they're much more disadvantaged because they're considerably smaller than the actual normal drone. And there is a variety of sizes in drones. And when they go out into their field trips, they haven't got as big an amount of storage and energy and so on to help compete when they mate. One of the downsides recently for our bees, the Varroa preferred drone cells because the drone has got a development time of 24 days as opposed to the workers 21 days. And basically those extra 3 days means that the Varroa can lay 3 or 4 eggs, and most of those eggs will hatch, whereas if they put it in a worker, only 2 eggs will hatch. So it's a preferred way of for them to mating. Some people remove the drone comb, or they take a fork, pronged fork, and they dig the drones out to help remove Varroa. But in actual fact, this castrates the colony. If you think about it, the drone takes 21 days to mature. When it hatches, it takes another further 12 to 15 days to actually the sperm to mature, which you'll see in a minute. So that's a month. That's 4 weeks. And if you think really the drones have got probably 3 to 4 months maximum, so you're taking an awful lot of the drones, excuse me, out of the equation. Before they can actually rebuild up themselves for mating. So you're diminishing their strength. And here's a couple of drones being taken out. And if you look on the left-hand side, you will see a little Varroa mite there as an example. And here is a cell, a drone cell, and you can see that the dark mite is the mother. And there's 3 mites there in the corner. And the bit of white stuff in the extreme right-hand side is the pupal skin left over. And here's a picture of the larger pupae that's been capped off of a drone in the cell. And if just out of interest, if you look on the corners, you'll see brown marks on the edges of the cells. What the drones do, or what the larvae do, is when they get into the cells, after they've been capped over, they get rid of all of their waste, all of their urea, and from all the pollen and the rest of it, and that gets dumped into there. And eventually, because the pupal skin gets developed, the actual size gets smaller and smaller, and it gets to sort of minimum sort of size, and it gets darker and darker. And a lot of people recommend that you should take your comb out and change it probably a third of it every year. Tom Seeley, the god, as once again has said, he doesn't do that on his wild hives, he just lets them get on with it. And there's a reason partly for that, they think, because if you leave your hives alone, they develop, they bring in the propolis, which they coat with everything, which is a disinfectant. And whereas we keep interfering with things and open them up, we're sort of, again, weakening the colony. Here's a picture of some drone pupae taken out at various stages. You can see there's slightly difference in size, but look at the eyes. You can tell by the colour of the pale, the pink and the brown, roughly what age the drones are. And here's another picture. These drones the capping got removed, but actually they were able to develop normally, despite the fact that the capping got removed. So that was a good sign. The drone is about 2.5 times larger than the worker. And he's quite unique because he's got specialized antennae and much bigger eyes. His wings are bigger and longer. And if you look at this drone, look at the top of the thorax, you can see all the hairs are gone. And you can see the curved abdomen there much better, which is an aid to mating. Right, and here's a picture of the worker on the right and the drone on the left, and you can see how much bigger the eyes are. He can probably see more or less 360 degrees. The worker's probably got a view of about 300 degrees. And if you look on the drone on the left, you can see there's a white mark on there, which is actually the reflection from the light. But it's a good illumination because roughly in that area, they've got their the facets, the little hexagonal parts of their eye, grouped together. And they think that drones particularly have got certain facets on the front that group together to enable them to look forward. And they're able to see up to 800 meters away the queen. And if you think how far you can see before you lose sight of a bee, it's pretty impressive distance on that one. There's a picture of their ocelli. You can see how they meet in the middle, and you can see two round dots there next to them. They're the ocelli, which they use for detecting ultraviolet light. All the bees smell through their antennae, and if you look on the right-hand picture, you can see like little pits on there, and those are the sensors that they use for smell. Now, the drone has got an extra bit to his antennae. He's got 11 facets in there as opposed to 10, and it's much bigger. Again, you'll see in a minute what I'm going to tell you about the size of that. These are the feet. On the right-hand side, you'll see the claw of a worker. And if you look on that, it's got like two sort of barbs, and that's what they use for gripping on rough surfaces. And there's a little pad on the right-hand side of that claw that swings out, and they use that to grip on things like glass that are very slippy. On the left-hand side, you can see the drone. He's got much more angular claws and no sort of second sort of barb to it. And one of the reasons they think that they're slightly like that is that they are better for gripping hold of the queen when they're mating. The drone mandibles are smaller, and they're on the left, and if you've got little barbs to them. The queens are a little bit like that as well. He's got a lot longer hairs on his as well. On the right-hand side, you'll see the mandibles of a worker, and there's a blue arrow, and the mandibles of the worker have got a groove that runs up the side, and they feed brood food down through there, and that's where they deposit it into the cells and to the larvae and the eggs and so on. On the top of the mandibles, you've got long hairs, and they think they're sensors, so that when they bring them together, the hairs bend, and they're able to feel what they're doing. The other thing for the drone, he doesn't have to earn his keep. So he doesn't have to feed, he doesn't have to manipulate wax. All they think was happening for the mandibles on the drone is probably because they're pointed. It helps dig the way out of the cell. Excuse me a moment, I'll give you a drink of water. That's better. Right. The actual drone itself, you'll see some more slides in a minute. His reproductive organs, which we're going to go on now, these are the immature testes of a drone, and that's taken off the top of lid of its abdomen. And you can see it almost takes up half the space. Now, the testes start developing when the eggs are laid, and the eggs change into a larvae, then they start developing then. But they aren't mature. Basically, they're still sort of manufacturing. They're almost finished there. And if we go on to the next slide, within the 12 to 14 days after they've hatched, the testes shrink down, and you can see the remnants with the red arrows. The big white blobs on either side are running up. They're the mucus glands. And the other vessels there are the storage glands that they store the sperm in, and it's only at this stage are they able to mate successfully. And here's a picture of the larvae, and you can see the testes there. That could be a queen or a stroke worker, and the ovaries of the female cast are roughly in the same position, but they're much, much thinner, obviously, and for a worker, there's only a few of them. In fact, there's quite a few, but they die off later on. And they're extremely hard to find, whereas the testes on a drone, if you're lucky, you can find them quite easily. This is the internal organs of a drone been dissected out. I want you to imagine you've just done your washing up and you've just taken your rubber gloves off and you've pulled one of the fingers back through and you're holding the glove up. And basically what happens with the drone is that his anatomy, which is on the top part there, is quite sort of deflated and flat. And what happens is if you were to grip hold of your glove and blow into the hand part, it will actually force the finger back out again. And it's that sort of analogy that you can think of the drones when they mate. They have to push the endophallus out, which we'll come to in the next slide. This is the first stage of mating. This is an immature drone, one of the ones you saw with the big testes. The two bits that are dangling down are called horns, and they are quite white and clear. If you look at the next image, this is a mature drone. And if you look at the horns there in front of you, you can see it's orangey. And what the orange does, it's because bees can see an ultraviolet light, when they mate, they leave some of this orange marker on the queen, and it seems to act as an attractant to the other drones. On the bottom of the picture, there's a bit of a hairy bit. Look at that and bear those hairs in mind because they've got a role to play later. And the first stage of the inversion is when the bulb, which you'll see in a minute, which stores the semen and the mucus in, gets pushed out and the horns get pushed out and the little tube that you've got the red arrow on there, it says blue on there, but it's red, yes. That tube gets inserted into the queen's mating chamber, okay? So that's the first stage. And if you look at the picture of the horns, it's got air in it. You can see air bubbles. Here's a picture of another drone. You can see the bulb here. This is where the sperm is kept, okay? And if you look at the bottom, you can see where I've just said you where the tube is. Now that bulb is about 1/8 of an inch. Whereas the tube is probably about 1/4 of that size. And somehow that bulb has got to get through that tiny little tube. And this is a drone that's been completely inverted. And if you look at the size of the reproductive anatomy, you know, it looks bigger than the abdomen almost. What's happened here is the drone on the first stage pushes its extremely strong muscles in the abdomen, and it pushes, by pushing the air in the abdomen and some of the blood, it pushes it out on the first stage, and then on the second stage it pushes even harder, and the remaining air and blood then goes into the vessel to inflate it. There's a mating sign which is left inside the queen, and this is a close-up, and you can see the yellow horns there. Where the red line is on the right-hand side of it, it breaks off and it's left inside the queen, and you can see the bulb on the end. You can see the hairy bit at the bottom. Again, we'll come to that one in a minute. This is a view looking at the end, and if you're going to do artificial insemination, you can squeeze your drones basically to stimulate the mating, and you'll end up by getting this at the end, which you can then take off with a pipette as such. What happens after the drone has mated, he then basically, well, within about 2 or 3 seconds, that's all it takes for mating, he will fall over and he's dead basically, and he'll leave his mating sign behind. The next drone will come up, and with the first stage of the inversion, he will poke his tube in, and the hairy bit that we mentioned, if I go back to this picture with the other bit in, it actually uses it as a brush to pull out the other drone's mating sign. And what they think is the glue, because there's nothing, I mean, the queen has to be receptive, and they think she helps grasp the actual endophallus. They think that the mucus doesn't tend to act as a block to stop any other sperm going in. It tends to act as a bit of a glue to hold it in place. And here's queen returning to the colony, and you can see the mating sign there, and you can see the yellow orangey marks from the previous drone as such. What happens basically is the drones will fly in, and she'll theoretically mate with up to 15, 20 drones, although recent evidence says up to 45. The last drone that won't or can't is unsuccessful to take out the mating sign means the queen will have to then go back to the hive, and theoretically, if she's okay, she will then stay in the hive, and the actual sperm then will get transferred into the spermatica. I've given you some notes here because I've didn't know whether some people will come in late and might miss some of the talk if you're recording it. But I've basically, what I've just told you through here, I've got on there. So if people want to reread this through, and if people want a copy of it, I'm quite happy to send it as such. The queen is quite unique because she mates with a large amount of drones, but she can only store the sperm in a vessel, which is a circular vessel called a spermatica. It can only take up to, well, theoretically one volume of ejaculate will fill it, but it tends to hold about 5 as it mixed together. But what happens is the, excuse me, is that the sperm goes into a hole into the oviducts, which are fairly expansive, and it gets stored into there, and it gets mixed. The sperm then gets kept for up to theoretically 5 years, although most people tend to requeen theirs. And if the queen's okay, then she will, within 3 or 4 days of getting back, will start laying. If she hasn't been successfully mated on the flight because of the weather, or didn't find the drone mating and it just happened locally, then she'll go up the next day as such. The reason they think of so many drones mixing is for A, to prevent inbreeding, which will happen, and also to try and get half a dozen, if you like, genetic lines, so that you're getting a mixture of workers in the hive, because each drone will bring in the genetics of his queen, and they will have different aspects. So, for example, one might be good at water carrying, one might be good at removing dead bees, and others are good at foraging. So, they get a bit of a mix into the hive. Now, drones do have a bit of luxury because they are fed by the worker bees, and they will, up to about 4 or 5 days after the hatching, they will still be fed. But after that, they will have to fend for themselves. They'll have to feed on the honey, basically, or any nectar that's around. They don't tend to eat pollen per se, because they don't have to produce brood food, which is a mixture of pollen and carbohydrates. And they don't have any more growing to do, which is why pollen is given to grubs, because it is a high protein for development. But they will help thermoregulate the hive, because they're a lot bigger and they tend to stay in groups. They will put their abdomens and their thoraxes, and they will vibrate their wing muscles to produce heat, so they'll help to keep the colony warm. One of the things that will affect development of drones and workers, particularly drones for fertility, is the food they're being fed, and by that I mean whether there's a scarcity of it, and the temperature of the hive. If it gets too hot or too cold, it can affect their development, because it can delay them and so on. Drone congregation areas are theoretically a place where drones go and gather, and the queen flies out to get mated. There's a lot of literature written about it, but no one really seems to know too much about it. So let's find out what happens. The starting point, when? Well, seasons, time of day, temperature and wind will affect the activity. Basically, the season we've mentioned is late spring, early summer. The time of day for the drones to fly round about midday till about 5 o'clock. The queen tends to go out about 1 o'clock. They do have body clocks, but they're not obviously as timekeepers as we are, but they're fairly good at going out at regular times. They'll obviously go out to do recce flights when they first develop to see what's what and get their orientation. It needs to be above 18 degrees temperature. It doesn't want to be too windy, and they won't fly out normally if it's if it's wet or if it's really overcast with the weather. They can obviously, like all bees, they can fly out in dull weather because they don't need to have the sun. They can orientate by ultraviolet and what's the other one? Polarized light. But because of, if it's too dark, then they won't necessarily have a look, which they think is a clue in a minute, which I'll hopefully give you as to how they use the signs of the sun and things. What makes a likely spot? And how do we find it, or how do they find it? Because that's the problem. It's been recorded that there's quite a few congregational sites around, and there's several in England that have been recorded from the 1700s that have been going on, and they're quite specific. Some known beekeepers don't believe there's congregation sites. Drones are just opportunists and they fly around, and they do mate away from drone congregation sites. They will mate closer to home, and they will mate actually in your apiary. But usually, if they're going to mate in the apiary, it's probably because you've had a supersedence rather than a swarm. And the other option is if you have a long, bad summer and the weather's poor, they'll just try and make the most of the opportunities given to them. It's been recorded that there's been up to 10,000 drones in a congregation area coming from 200 different colonies. A lot of this has been done by the Koningers in Austria. Drones are attractive when they get to the drone congregation area because they produce a pheromone from their mandibles. And if you think they can smell the queen from 800 meters, they probably can smell each other. The queen flies to the site. She has got a few workers normally tend to accompany her because she's never been there before. So how does she find it? That's another question. This is why some people think that some of the workers have done some scouting. Once she gets there, a virgin queen will have her own unique pheromone, which the drones will hone in on. And once she gets up to 50 meters away, they will hone in onto her. I've given you the times and the other bits and pieces there. They can make up to 5 flights in an afternoon. They will fly up to 25 minutes on a tank full of honey. There's some thought that the drone will actually fly to the congregation area and rest up and wait. The evidence for us, because we found 5 different drone congregation areas, is that we don't personally, when we're walking around, ever kick the grass and find them flying up. That might well be because, again, our perception's too poor. But it's well known that drones will often fly quite close to their hives, probably half a mile away, and form a congregation. So it's not too far away. And the other option is that it's not uncommon for drones that are out in a congregation to fly and visit another hive and take in stores from there. They'll be recognized and are permitted to do so, then going back out. So they have a lot of activity to do for a long time, whereas a worker tends to fly from A to B, to get water, nectar or pollen or whatever, then fly back again. You know, they do obviously do quite a few miles, but the drone tends to be a bit more intense about it. Where are they? What heights? They've recorded from 50 to 200 feet they tend to fly. They fly at a speed of 12 to 15 miles an hour. The average 96% are within, I said, half a mile of matings of a hive or colony. The longest is 7 kilometers away, which is about, I think, 3.5 miles for you people. The longest flight time observed is 171 minutes, but we don't know whether the drone was resting or refueling. And we think they last about 25 minutes. Like all these figures, they're all a little bit nominal because what one person sees and records is slightly different. Unfortunately for us, the bees don't read the books, which is probably a good thing. How do they find it? Very difficult. They look for the direction of flights for other drones. They're within half a mile of the hive. They quite like open ground. Often somebody's got a tree cover, which is really, I would say, a forest or a row or a line of trees, because that offers them a marker and a shelter. A slope that's probably south facing and less than 19 degrees. It's not too high. They're looking for landmarks. And they're looking for probably high solar radiation, and high solar radiation, basically to you and I, means a sunspot, a hot spot in the air. We'll come on to the bee's eyes in a minute, and the local situations. When we are looking at a map, we're trying to look at from the studies that people have done, which we'll see in the next picture. We look at an Ordnance Survey map now. For us, basically in England, an Ordnance Survey map is a walking map, and they've got contours on it that tells you the heights of hills and valleys, so you can work out theoretically whether you're up or down and what might be an ideal place. It's hard to extract relevant features from that because half our problem over in England is the land's owned by somebody. Unless you've got a footpath or permission, you can't always get to where you'd like to go, where you think that things are happening. Particularly the contours is quite awkward on the angle of the slopes, because the closer the contours are, the steeper the angle, but you've got to try and work that out. There's not a binary output for most of the features. And to be honest, a human inspection is probably a bit quicker, your local knowledge. And if you get a Google map of the Earth, you get a quick look at that and you can see the trees. It's giving you a much better way of transforming the data. The classic model of a DCA is, you can see there's a picture of the bees together in the middle, the center. That's where they tend to go. Then you've got an oval shape around them, which is a flight area, which they will hover around in. And if the queen goes into that area, they will get to her mate. If the queen's around that area and doesn't go into it, they're not interested. They seem to be in one particular area. And if you look on this picture, you can see you've got barley, wheat and rye, and you've got a bit of a river in the bottom. These are some of the clues that they might use, not so much that they can tell the difference between the crop, but you've got water there, which is going to give off a line and some radiation. You've got flat ground. Likely places where they go is a little picture. You've got wind on the top picture coming across. You've got the sun coming down, and you've got a bit of a hill in the background, and you get what they call a warm bubble because you get the solar radiation there. So they can measure the temperature. The next bottom picture, you get the same basic heat on either side of the tree and the sun there. You get thermals, and you can get a drone congregation above there because it's a thermal as such. You could equally, if you look on the left picture, you're in a valley there and you get the wind eddying around, you've got the hill, and if you look on the right picture, you'll see the actual view where it's fairly flat. And the bottom picture basically is just giving you a bit of a contour type thing. So you can see where the wind's going and the sort of the vortexes and that sort of thing. These are just suggestions of a human interpretation. I sent this to Randy. He's had a look at this, and again, if you want it, you have a look at it. This is a very good slow motion of drones mating with the queen. When you watch it, you will see the first drone going in. They form a comet behind the queen coming up. He'll mate, and then within about 3 seconds after, he'll drop off, and within a second, the next drone's there. It almost looks like it's the film's going round and round in a loop because it looks the same, but they're different drones coming in as such. So if you get a chance to look at that, have a little look. One of the things that the scientists have come up with is they've done some research in Austria and New Zealand, and they're looking for what they call a depletion on the horizon. So you've got a valley here, and you can see basically a V in the bottom of the horizon. So they're aiming for that V. What do they do when they go to probably in England or America? There's no valleys. It's just flat. How do they work it out? That's the problem, or it's our problem trying to understand it as well. As such, here's the contour maps that I've looked at here, and if you can look at, you can see. I don't know if you can see. There's 2 blue triangles, and they are the hives, about 10 colonies in each. There's a red line going through, which is basically where at each end of that line is where the drone congregation area is. And there's a green dashes there, which actually is a footpath, but the footpath has got trees running up the edges of it. So we've got, either side, we've got a valley with a flat bottom. It's facing north, so we're getting the sun from the south, and the sort of wind basically predominantly for us is southwest as well, so that we can see roughly what's what. So that's the sort of clue that we were looking for. How do we attract the drones when we're trying to do some research? We can get a queen, a dead one, a live one, and tie it up. We can get a virgin queen, ideally, because the dead queen or a live queen is a fertile, already been mated, so she won't have quite the same pheromone makeup as a virgin will have. And you can buy synthetic virgin hormone, 9-ODA, which you can actually put on your lure. It's about, I think for us, time we pay the import and everything else, it's about $500, enough for, I think it's 1,000 queens. That's the smallest amount we can get from Canada. How do we attract them? We've got a choice of putting it on a rod or a pole. Bear in mind, I said to you, we start off at 50 meters. We can put it on a balloon and tether it to that, or we can put it on a kite, or we can put it on a drone, an unmanned flying machine with a camera on it. This is a picture of what we did first of all. The lure here is on the bottom, and it's a piece of wood painted black with one end of it dipped in the pheromone. And you'll see a weight at the top just to keep it down. And there's an interesting drone just coming up to make a little investigation. Now that's put on a pole. Here's a pole. The red arrow is the actual lure, and you can see we're just waving that around. You can see the drones always come upwards, and you can see them form a bit of what we call a comet. And once they get interested, I mean, unfortunately, as soon as the first one gets up there and decides this is not what I'm looking for, they all split up and go their separate ways quite rapidly. But they will form and keep reforming. Here's the same type of thing, but this time it's higher up. On a couple of helium balloons, and there's the lure. And if you look on this one here, you can see masses of drones at the top and at the bottom. Take my word for it, there's over 300 drones in that picture. Now, when we were looking at that high up and we're using our eyes and binoculars, what are we estimating? Oh, we can probably see 50, perhaps 70 drones there in the short time we can have a look at. We can certainly hear and we can see the odd drone past us, and they're very, very vocal. But by taking the pictures and the videos, it's proved to us that, our eyes are so poor at looking at it. This is showing us what we're missing. Now, this is the next stage where we had to try and work out how many helium balloons to take up. And we put a net on there because the black bits in there are lures to try and get the drones to go inside so that we can capture them and then mark them with a white marker so we can then release them and then try and capture them again the same or the next day, and going back to the hives and seeing which drones are in the hives as well, which hives they're coming from. That worked quite well, but the drag and the wind on the line meant we had to put 11 balloons up there. Unfortunately, it got caught up on a hedge and it broke the line, and it went literally sky high up into the clouds very rapidly. And I had to make a new one. And the actual netting is a wedding veil. And I since discovered that when you sew it, and my wife gave me a hand to sew it in the end, you have to tack it on to tissue paper because it's so slippy and it goes all over the place and drags and pulls. That's the secret. So anyway, I'm not making any wedding vows again. What we did then, we actually we got some cheap children's netting, and we tried the lures just above that. We tried capturing the drones, and we basically managed to capture 55 on one DCA. Then we went on to another DCA and we used a different color marker and captured another 55. Then we went back and we watched about 5 o'clock, we were watching any of the drones coming back, and the 2 hives that the people own, they looked at them the next day. They went out at 12 o'clock and had a look at the drones going out for several hours, and they went back again about 4 o'clock and watched coming back. But we could only find 1 drone on each hive that went back. So where the others come from, we don't know. There are other hives around, but they're quite a bit further away on that one. The problem for us is we know the bees can see. They can see ultraviolet. They can see polarized light. They don't see color. They see so the ultraviolet and blues and greens. They don't think they see yellows very well. They think they see yellows as being different intensities of blue. And the bee itself, when it flies along, it's able to have a refresh rate of far higher than what humans are. And by that, for those of you who can remember an old cine film, if the film was more than 20 frames per minute, we perceive it as being continuous, so it's in motion. If it's less than that and it flickers, then it's very stilted for us. Bees have got much, much faster, so they can refresh much quicker. So they're able, when they fly, to see things, in inverted commas, clearer than what we are. And if you think when you go along in a car, you're looking in front of you, you can see quite clearly. But if you look sideways at the ground, you can't see it. It's just fleeting past. They don't think bees see in the same way that we do. They don't need to see in the same detail that we do. And they think that they see angular shapes quite well, and they can form a memory because they leave a pattern on their eye as such. So it's the outline that they're looking at rather than the detail, and they don't see in colour until they go closer to things like flowers and the likes. That's when their perception of colour and ultraviolet is much better. So we still don't know why or where the bees find these drone congregation areas. One of the other thoughts is that it's well known that bees, both the worker and the drones, will have flight paths, and they would tend to, for example, if you've got a whole row of trees, they'll fly along the top or the side of the trees. And it's quite possible that they will fly along one flight path, and they'll do, for argument's sake, a right-hand turn to another flight path. And they think possibly that where they're doing the turn at that 90-degree point is where there could well be a congregation site. Lots of ideas, lots of suggestions. No one's really got any firm ideas. Colin Butler, who was a well-known, respected bee researcher in Britain, didn't believe in drone congregations whatsoever. Although I think most scientists now think they do exist, but they're obviously bees, as I said before, will mate outside of the congregation, depending on the time of year, the weather, and so on. Because it is survival of the fittest. Some drones, if the colony's queenless, will overwinter. Sometimes if the queen's not doing too well, a few of them will overwinter, and a few of them will actually go with swarms. Quite often will stay with swarms when they leave, as such. Opportunists, because they won't have a lot of honey and stuff when they get to their new hive, because they've obviously got to start afresh if it's going to be into a wild colony and the likes. So that's a bit of a brief, quick run through of what the differences are between a drone, what he does, how his reproduction bits work, and how he mates and so on. On that side of things, he will live normally for about 5 weeks from the time he hatches. They can live longer, as before, but that tends to be his lifestyle. He tends to be the first 2 weeks in the hive and the last 3 weeks out and about as such with mating. He is so important because, I say, the genetics, he's passing on the queen's genes. And one of the problems we get with artificial insemination is that you can squeeze the drone and find out, oh, it's got a white horny bit, throw it away. But you can then squeeze the next one and find that it's got a yellow horny bit. So, oh, that's okay, it's mature, we can utilize that. What tends to happen is in the mating, when they go up there, they think it's the fittest drones that actually get to mate with the queen. They've got the most stamina as such, and therefore able to pass on their genetics. Whereas when we're selecting drones, are we necessarily selecting the best drones that normally sort of would fly out and everything else? And if you think what I said before, that only out of 5,000 drones, only 400 get to maturity, there's not too many that are, if the queen only mates with 15 or 20, and the chances of your drones passing on their genes are quite slim on that side of things. I think that's basically a bit of a summary for you. If I just go on for a second, some of the pictures I've taken out, if you look on here, these are some pictures you've seen the bottom two as such on there. And the one in the middle is of a drone that's just hatched out with a pupal larva on. This is my third book that's coming out in April, May time, which is all about anatomy, basically. It's a pictorial essay type book for the, if I put it, in England, we'd say that the anorak, the intense beekeeper that wants to do a bit of microscopy or to do a bit of research to do with anatomy. The idea behind this is to be used with snodgrasses and Dade's book as such. The book that I've taken some of the bits from today is, the other one is the drone congregation. I don't want to not sell my books, but what I would say to people is we have a library in our local group, and we tend to get books into there because A, it's good to read all sorts of things, and B, you can evaluate what the book's like. I don't like buying books unless I know who the author is or people have recommended it without looking into it as such. The drone book has got lots of facts and information. It's very picture heavy. It's very much into the reproductive side of it, and it's a little bit repetitive because it's quite complex. And rather than keep going back to chapter 1 to understand it, I've repeated a couple of bits into that on that side of it. The other book, Honeybee and Hive Information, that answers lots of questions because I write regularly for our magazine. Do bees sleep? What's in bee poo? Do they have knees? What about the birds and the bees? How did the bee get its hump? Pests and pollen and insects I found in people's honey, and how to identify the pollen and all sorts of things. It's a bit like a Reader's Digest. You can pick up, put down, designed to be read in short chapters. That's really for the generalist beekeeper, much more of a fun book. That's just came out just after Christmas. So, any questions?
We do have some questions in the chat, Graham. One really good question is if the hive make winter workers bees, and you open the hive late in the winter and you see a drone in there, do they make drone winter bees or drone whatever?
Okay. Drones don't basically, I can put it, normally drones are in the mating season, May, June, July. They will carry on till August sometimes because there's still a need if there's supersedence or the queen dies. So that, they're not all the drones are going to get kicked out as such. Some will, go on till later on, but normally most of them will get kicked out. They tend to overwinter if the queen's starting to fail or if there's been a supersedence in the late autumn time, and so there's a new queen been produced, so the few drones will possibly overwinter. They're not actually overwintering as bees, worker bees, because worker bees, the physiology is slightly different for overwintering bees because they don't have to forage, they don't have to feed brood food, so therefore the demand on their bodies is a lot less. So they're able to overwinter because of, basically their needs are a lot simpler and the demands are a lot less. So the answer basically is no, they don't overwinter in the same way. They still feed, on everything else, but because the drones aren't producing anything, they can overwinter as well.
So Graham, if you can stop sharing your screen, I will share mine and show the video.
Graham, there's another question, how do other drones mate with the queen when the organs of the first drone is stuck in her?
Okay, they fly up, and that first inversion I showed you, that bushy bit on the bottom acts like a brush. It sticks onto, they come in and it'll actually help brush out the other mating sign, so it can then insert the tube into the queen's sting chamber to start the second phase. And it's the pure force that pushes the bulb piece into the queen's chamber, and then it breaks off to leave the mating part there. One of the reasons they think that drones don't compete as such, they're all, if you like, brotherly love sort of thing. What they think happens possibly is the sperms don't compete either, because it's known that sperms will compete sometimes in mating and fertilization. But in the queen spermatica, the sperm are sort of coiled up a bit, and they live for up to 5 years. But what happens when the queen decides to lay a fertilized egg, she will actually deposit from the spermatica half a dozen sperm onto the egg. And they think possibly it's at that stage that the sperm will compete with each other to be the first strongest sperm to get in to fertilize the egg. There we are. Here's the picture.
Yes. So let's start it up. Everybody can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
That's the queen. See the drones?
During the mating ceremony. When the queen returns from her maiden flight, she keeps 5 million sperms in her sperm bag. In there, they can stay alive for 8 years.
I'll put this link into the chat.
If you have a quick look on YouTube, there's a few others there as well that other people have done, short ones.
Graham, it's intriguing. I'm also an engineer. This is Robert, and I'm always trying to figure out how people do things. How in the world did they record this?
With a drone itself. You know, one of the unmanned aerial vehicles.
Okay, okay.
When they have used harmonic radar to not to try and find out where drones are, because you can actually see the small, because they're so small. The only downside of the harmonic radar is it's got quite a small cone, if you like, that it sends out, so you can't see too big an area. But they can sort of trace that. I mean, we're hoping this year we've got given a drone machine. Unfortunately, the battery's flat, so we have to buy another one. So we're going to hopefully practice and try that this year. It's been done on, there's some YouTubes out there that they've done it on. Another time they've got another good one where they've put it on a tripod and they've taped a queen to the end of a bar with a camera on it, and they've gone around and you can actually see the drones mating on that. That's quite an interesting one. It's very, again, most of these are slowed down because it's very quick. It's about 2 or 3 seconds, the mating.
Okay. We have one question in the chat room. It said, it really bothers me to see the bees kick the drones out in the fall or winter. Is there anything we can do to prevent them from doing that?
Not really, because you'll be hindering nature. Because if you, for argument's sake, have another 1,000 mouths to feed, you will then deplete the stores, and you'll end up by probably having starvation within the colony. So it's nature's way. One of the reasons, okay, the queen lays an unfertile egg, unfertilized egg, and that turns into a drone, okay? But all of those 5,000 eggs basically have got all the same sperm with them. So they think that one of the reasons that you only really want one drone to mate is because all the others are going to have the same, more or less, genetics to them. Whereas if you think about the workers, they've all got different fathers, so they're going to have a different genetic makeup. You know, but there's going to be obviously groups of them in there with the same father. So if you're going to keep another 1,000 drones over the winter, you know, you're great for the queen from that point of view, but it's a big drain on the colony. You know, when you think that they take 21 days to feed, they take another 12 to 14 days before they get mature. You know, there's an awful lot, and there's another 3 or 4 weeks after that to keep fed. And they're 2.5 times the size of the worker. You know, big boys, got big appetite.
There's another question. I was wondering how the sperm survive so long. Do they remain dormant?
Okay. When the sperm are first ejaculated, they've got incredibly long tails and they're actually coiled up, and they will start, once they get ejaculated, to unwind. The sperm get taken into the oviducts, which are quite large and expansive type things, and then they make their way up into eventually into the spermatica. That has got a huge network of tracheoles around it because of the way the bees have oxygen. Basically, oxygen almost goes down to the cellular level when it then becomes attaches to the cell, and it goes across by when it's sort of wet. So they get all their oxygen there. They think some of the mucus gets in there, and the queen has got other secretions that help feed them and keep them. There is some research going on at the moment, actually, to try and work out what's in the, well, they've done quite a bit of actually in the semen, but also now into the queen spermatica to try and understand how they can keep it for so long. I mean, most queens probably, in nature, probably last 2 to 3 years before they get seeded or they swarm. You know, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine that if they're starting losing their fertility and they're losing their pheromones, you know, that the unity of the hive is going to start to break up probably, and they're going to start then raising queen cells.
Do you use the green frame for as your integrated pest management to treat for mites?
I don't personally treat for mites. I haven't treated for mites for 5 years. Before that, I've tried some of the miticides in there. I tried one, I think it's called in English, it's called Q-strip or something. I put it on in the evening, as they said, and I went out. My wife said to about 10 minutes later, your bees are swarming. And I went outside and they weren't swarming, but they were all bearding all around the outside, the whole colony of the entrance. They obviously didn't like it. And it was only about half an hour before it was dark. So I sort of thinking, shall I scoop them back in? Am I going to lose the queen or what shall I do? But anyway, I left it for 20 minutes and thought I got my torch out. And they actually went in when it started to get dark. I thought, if they're coming out like that, I wasn't very keen. And there's an awful lot of research out now that's saying a lot of these mitricides are where we're treating them is getting caught up in the wax. And the problem is in the development of the larvae, the wax and all the miticides are going across and they're affecting the fertility of the drone. It's affecting the amount of sperm they're producing and the viability of it. And they possibly thinking, like all these things, it's another reason for colony collapse. It could be. As I said, I'm a bit of a disciple of Tom Seeley's. I don't have to make money out of this. I'm there for pollination and everything else. I take the view that drones have now, Varroa have now reached the point where they've got so much resistance, nothing seems to be working. I've got mesh floors on. I've tried shaking them with sugar before now, which has a little bit of effect. I've taken the view that we need to let the bees evolve with the Varroa, because if we don't, we're interfering all the time, and there's going to come a point where we're going to end up by destroying the bees. I mean, in Tom's book, he mentions, I think when he did it, it took 5 years and his colony losses were quite high, something like 75%. So it's we need somehow to manage our colonies better.
So there's another question. I have read and heard that drone sperm viability and quality has declined. Is that due to poor genetics, temperature? What do you think?
Okay, some of it is down to genetics because of the way that, like all things, we're all different. Some of it, for example, if you're having a smaller drone because it's in a smaller worker cell, will have less volume and possibly poorer development. Some of it's down to the pesticides. Some of it's down to we've had a poor year this year because it's been so cold and the drone development's been delayed, and it's probably a longer time because of the temperature and that there's no foraging going in. So it's probably a multiple of things. But if we're going to treat them with pesticides and and miticides, it's not helping.
Graham, there was a message earlier or a chat, and it says, does gluing the marker to the virgin queen cause any issues of returning to the hive? Because she's basically becoming a target for birds and maybe other insects.
Can you repeat the first part you say about marking the queen? I didn't hear the first bit.
Yeah, so marking the queen a problem?
Okay. So you're marking the queen, I presume, in the hive before she goes out. I don't necessarily think so. I mean, again, in the wild, quite a few queens fail to return to the hives, because they do get birds, and particularly in England, there's a couple of birds that will eat bees, and some of them get knocked off, weather-wise and other bits and pieces. But I wouldn't have thought particularly that will help them. I know that workers accompany the queens to the drone congregation areas. Whether they accompany her back, I've not read about that one as such.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
Everybody's commenting that it was a tremendous presentation and appreciate all your studying to keep us educated.
Okay, you're very welcome. If anybody's got any questions they want to email me, I'm quite happy to answer them tomorrow, not tonight.
Thanks for staying up late.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll be looking for also additional presenters here and bring some exciting topics to the club.